She shattered records, conquered grand slams, and made an entire nation weep with pride. Yet on the darkest night of her career, it wasn't her coach who reached out. It wasn't her family. It was the wife of the greatest clay court champion alive who broke a silence nobody expected, revealing a phone call nobody knew happened at midnight when Alex Eala needed it most. Mary Perelló, the woman who stood beside Rafa Nadal through 22 Grand Slams, 2 retirements, 2 sons, and 19 years of loyalty, does not speak publicly. Not about tennis, not about her husband's proteges, not about what happens behind closed academy walls in Manaker, Spain. Until now, what she revealed shook the tennis world. And what Rafa did that midnight hour will change how you see him forever. Picture a 12-year-old girl boarding a plane in Manila, Philippines, leaving behind her language, her streets, her childhood comfort, everything familiar to chase something most people in her country had never even dreamed of chasing. Not football, not basketball, tennis. Alex Eala arrived at the Rafa Nadal Academy in Manaker, Mallorca in 2018. A wide-eyed 13-year-old with a forehand that whispered future greatness and a backhand that quietly promised war, she had grown up watching players who looked nothing like her dominate the sport she adored. There were no Filipino role models in professional tennis. None, not a single one to look up to call and ask, "How did you do it?" She existed in a sporting vacuum. Brilliant, isolated, and entirely self-motivated. But the academy didn't care about where you were from. It cared about how hard you worked. And from the beginning, the staff at Manaker understood they had something rare on their hands. Not just a talented junior, but a competitor with an uncanny emotional control that reminded the coaches of someone very specific. Someone who had trained on those same courts. Someone whose name was on the building. She won the Australian Open Junior Doubles title at 14, then the Roland Garros Junior Doubles, and this was the moment the Philippines collectively held its breath. The US Open Junior Singles crown in 2022, first Filipina ever in the history of the tournament. She was 17 years old and she had already done what generations of players from her nation had never accomplished. Rafael Nadal watched from a distance. He was at that point still competing, battling injuries, battling time, battling the brutal mathematics of a career winding toward its conclusion. But he noticed, his academy staff noticed. Joan Bosch, her coach, noticed most of all. This young woman was not simply talented, she was built for pressure, and yet the professional tour was a different beast entirely. Between 2023 and 2024, Eala entered qualifying rounds at Roland Garros, Wimbledon, and the US Open. Each time she fell in the opening round of qualifying, not the main draw, not the second round, the very first match of the qualifying bracket before the real tournament even began. 3 consecutive Grand Slam qualifying exits. While her contemporary Mura Andreeva, the same player Eala had beaten 6-4, 6-0 in the 2022 US Open Junior quarterfinals, Eala watched from outside the glass, ranked 140th in the world with nothing but promise and pain. Those defeats didn't just sting, they accumulated, they stacked. They whispered the most dangerous question an athlete can hear inside their own mind. What if I'm not good enough? What nobody knew, what even the closest observers of her career didn't fully grasp was that the hardest night was still coming. And when it arrived, it would come with silence, darkness, and a phone screen lighting up at midnight. But before we get there, you need to understand the woman who made that call possible. Maria Francisca Perelló. The world calls her Mary. The tennis world barely knows her name, and that is entirely intentional. She met Rafael Nadal at 17 through his sister in their hometown of Manaker, the same sun-baked Mallorcan town where the academy now stands. She watched him claim his first French Open. She watched him conquer Wimbledon. She watched him cry at the Australian Open. She watched him lose, come back, lose again, and return as if defeat were merely a detour. For 19 years, she stood beside the greatest competitor the sport has ever produced, and she said almost nothing publicly about any of it. While other tennis partners became celebrities in their own right, launching brands, granting interviews, building social presences, Mary went the opposite direction. She pursued a business management degree at the University of the Balearic Islands. She completed graduate studies at ESADE in Barcelona. She ran the charitable arm of the Rafa Nadal Foundation. She raised her first son, Rafa Jr., born in October 2022, largely out of the public eye. And in August 2025, she welcomed her second son, Miguel, named for her late father, who passed away in April 2023. While the world only found out days after the birth, this is a woman who guards privacy like a fortress, who understands that silence is a form of power, who watched her husband absorb the pressure of being the best in the world for 2 decades and learned deeply personally what it costs a human being to carry that weight alone. So when Mary Perelló spoke publicly about Alex Eala, even in the indirect, careful manner that she did, the tennis community stopped cold. Because Mary does not speak about players, she does not involve herself in tennis narratives. She does not comment on her husband's proteges or former students or the young athletes who trained within their walls unless something moved her so profoundly that silence became impossible. In a rare candid moment during a foundation event in Mallorca captured by a Spanish journalist and shared across social media within hours, Mary was asked about Rafa Nadal's academy's most celebrated graduate, about Alex Eala's spectacular 2025 season, about what it meant to the academy family, and she paused. Not the pause of someone calculating a diplomatic answer, the pause of someone deciding whether to share something real. Rafa cares about her in a way that goes beyond tennis, she said. When she struggles, he feels it. After her worst loss, he could not sleep. He called her. I was there. I heard the conversation. The room went quiet. Nobody had known about that call. Not Alex's team, not the Philippine media, not the fans who had followed every match, every ranking update, every historic first. A midnight call from Rafa Nadal after her biggest loss. So what was that loss and why did it break even him? To understand why that midnight call shattered every wall Eala had carefully constructed around her emotions, you have to understand what the 2025 Eastbourne Open final represented. By the time Eala arrived at Eastbourne, her season had already rewritten Philippine sporting history. The Miami Open's semi-final run, a wildcard entry ranked 140th in the world, had produced one of the most staggering sequences women's tennis had witnessed in years. She eliminated Jelena Ostapenko. She dismantled Madison Keys, the Australian Open champion, 6-4, 6-2. And then in a performance that sent shock waves through the sport, she defeated Iga Swiatek, the former world number 1, 6-2, 7-5, breaking her serve 8 times across 2 sets. Tony Nadal, Rafa's uncle, his longtime coach, the architect of his competitive philosophy, had traveled to Miami specifically to observe. When Eala walked off that court, she was no longer a promising junior product. She was a force, but forces unchecked can overextend. And by the time the grass court season arrived, Eala carried something heavier than confidence. She carried expectation, a nation's expectation, a sport's curiosity, the weight of being described in every article, every broadcast segment, every social media caption as the future of women's tennis. The Eastbourne final against a seasoned top 10 opponent became a masterclass in how expectation can suffocate even the most composed competitors. Eala lost the opening set tightly, then the second, then the match. The runner-up finish, which objectively represented a historic achievement for any Filipina player, felt in the dressing room afterward like something far worse than a loss. It felt like a door slamming shut on a season-defining moment that would never return. She had been 2 sets away from her first WTA title on European grass. 2 sets away from proving that Miami wasn't a miracle, it was a blueprint. Witnesses at the venue described her composure during the post-match handshake as remarkable. She smiled. She congratulated her opponent. She answered media questions with the measured clarity of someone twice her age. But those who knew her, truly knew her, recognized the particular stillness that descends on a competitor who has gone somewhere very quiet inside themselves. She returned to her hotel room. The Philippine journalist sent congratulatory messages. Her coach analyzed the tactical errors. The academy shared a supportive post. The ranking points still pushed her toward the top 50, and none of it touched the weight she was carrying. At some hour past midnight in Eastbourne, England, her phone screen lit up. Spanish number, a name she had first encountered as a wide-eyed teenager chasing someone through a Madrid airport begging for a photograph. It was Rafa, not a message, not a voice note, a call. And according to Mary, who was beside him, he had been awake for hours watching replays of the match, unable to settle until he simply picked up the phone and dialed. What did he say, and why did it make Mary cry? Mary Perelló did not reveal every word spoken during that call. She's not that kind of person, and that conversation was never meant for public consumption. But what she shared in fragments carefully painted a picture that the tennis world has spent weeks trying to fully absorb. He told her what nobody was telling her. Mary said everyone was saying you did great, runner-up is amazing, you should be proud. Rafa said something different. What Rafa said, according to Mary's account, wasn't comfort, it wasn't consolation, it was recognition. He told Eala that the pain she was feeling wasn't weakness, it was proof. Proof that she wanted it badly enough to hurt. Proof that she wasn't someone who had accidentally stumbled into a WTA final and felt satisfied with the attendance ribbon. He told her that, and this is the fragment that spread across tennis social media like wildfire once Mary mentioned it, that the night after his first French Open loss, he could not eat. He sat in his hotel room and stared at the wall for 3 hours. And that pain, he said, built the foundation for everything that came after. Mary, sitting beside him during the call, admitted she began to cry not out of sadness, out of recognition because she had witnessed that version of Rafa, the one who sat with pain instead of running from it. The one who turned devastation into architecture. I realized, she said, that he was giving her the one thing that had made him who he was giving her himself. The Philippine media erupted when fragments of the story circulated. Fan accounts dedicated to Alex posted the quote in 37 different languages within one news cycle. Within 48 hours, #Rafa and Alex was trending in the Philippines, Spain, and unexpectedly Japan. Commentators who had spent years covering women's tennis debated whether this constituted inappropriate mentorship optics or one of the most beautiful sporting moments of the calendar year. But amid the noise, one detail remained consistently striking. Alex, when asked about the night at Eastbourne during a subsequent press conference, paused with that same familiar composure. Then she said, "Someone reminded me why I play. I don't think I'll ever forget that." She never said his name. She didn't have to because by then everyone understood she was talking about Rafael Nadal. The academy in Manaker hadn't just given Alex Eala better footwork, sharper timing, or a pathway into the professional tour. It gave her something far rarer, something no ranking system or coaching manual can measure: perspective. The lived philosophy of a champion who had stood at the same edge of doubt, pressure, and expectation and chose to step forward anyway. And suddenly the question around Eala changed. It wasn't if she could win at the highest level. It became how far can she go carrying that mindset. The answer came almost immediately. 3 months after Eastbourne, the stage shifted to US Open, New York, Flushing Meadows under the lights. Eala walked onto the courts and did something no Filipino man or woman had ever done in the Open era. She won a Grand Slam main draw singles match, history written in one night. But it wasn't just the result, it was how she did it. The same identity she revealed in Miami showed up again: clear, fearless, unmistakable, aggressive from the first ball, taking time away, standing on the baseline like she belonged there. Her left-handed topspin opened angles her opponent couldn't read. And then came the shot, the flat forehand down the line, the exact shot Rafael Nadal had spoken to her about during training in Manaker, the one he had broken down, adjusted, refined in a session she would later call unforgettable. This time it wasn't just technique, it was instinct, it was trust, it was something deeper. That ball didn't just land inside the line. It landed with purpose, like she wasn't just executing a shot, she was honoring a moment. By the end of 2025, the rankings caught up with what the tennis world was starting to feel. Top 50, not hype, not projection. Arrival. She didn't just rise through the rankings, she arrived. Alex Eala closed out her breakthrough season by capturing the Guadalajara Open title. A victory that felt less like a trophy and more like a declaration. And then came the message. A single post that stopped people mid-scroll across the world. "My dreams have come true. Everything that happened this season is a love letter to my family, friends, team, everyone who supported me, and of course to little Alex." That last line carried weight because little Alex wasn't just a phrase. It was the 12-year-old girl in Manila who packed her life into a suitcase and left home chasing something that didn't come with a map or a guarantee. No blueprint, no precedent, no Filipino before her had ever stood where she was now standing. By March 2026, the numbers told part of the story. World number 29, the highest-ranked Filipino player in WTA history. But numbers never capture the full picture, because behind every milestone, every breakthrough, every first, there was something constant. Manaker, the academy, and the man who built it, Rafael Nadal, didn't just watch her rise from a distance. He stepped back onto the court during the off-season specifically to train with her. The footage said everything. 2 players rallying on the same clay. One, a retired legend who had defined an era. The other, a rising force beginning to shape her own. A decade apart in experience, connected by the same surface, the same discipline, the same obsession. Eala later called it special, said hitting with Rafa was something most young players only dream about. Nadal's own words were simpler. 1 year later, it felt great to be back on a tennis court. On the surface, that's all it was. 2 posts, 2 perspectives, nothing more. No mention of the late-night call, no mention of Eastbourne, no mention of what had been said quietly off-camera in Mallorca. But the subtext was impossible to ignore because what you were seeing wasn't just a coach and a player. It wasn't even just a mentor and a protege. This was something deeper, a connection built on shared understanding. The kind that only exists between people who know exactly what this path demands. The pressure, the isolation, the cost of chasing greatness when there are no guarantees waiting at the end. They both knew it, they had both stood at that edge, and they both chose again and again to step forward anyway. That's the difference. Not talent, not opportunity, the willingness to pay the price repeatedly without certainty. That's what separates champions, and long before the world fully understood it, Mary already did. Because while the tennis world was still catching up, her silence had already started to break. And then came the part nobody saw coming. Not a headline, not a press release, not a post-match quote buried in a transcript. This was something quieter, more dangerous, more honest. After the foundation event where Mary first referenced the midnight call, a Spanish journalist pressed further. He asked whether she believed Alex Eala truly understood the weight of what had been invested in her. Not just the facilities, not just the coaching structure at Manaker, but the personal investment, the attention, the time, the belief, the call that didn't have to be made. Mary didn't answer immediately. She sat with the question, let it breathe, then she said, I think she is beginning to understand. A pause. When you are young and winning, you think people believe in you because of what you are doing. It takes time to realize they believed before you did anything. Another pause. Rafael Nadal believed in Alex before Miami, before the US Open, before any of it. Then the line that reframed everything that came before it. That's the only belief that matters. Those two sentences didn't behave like quotes, they traveled. They spread beyond interviews and articles and match reports into early morning voice notes sent between Filipino fans half a world apart. Into comment sections dissecting every word like hidden code. Into newsroom drafts about mentorship, legacy, and what it means when sports stops being transactional. Because underneath all the rankings, all the trophies, all the breakout results and viral highlights, this story was never just about results. It was about recognition before validation, about being seen before being proven, about someone somewhere deciding without evidence, without guarantees that a young player's future was worth investing in anyway. And that changes everything because wins can be measured, titles can be counted, rankings can be tracked. But belief, real belief, the kind that arrives before the world agrees, that's not statistics, that's not development. That's the beginning of every champion story long before anyone realizes they're watching one. It is about what it means to carry someone else's faith through the moments when your own begins to crack. About a retired champion with 2 young sons, 19 years of partnership, 22 Grand Slam titles, and a name etched into the very academy where future players are forged who could not sleep after watching a 20-year-old from the Philippines lose a final in England. Not because losses are rare in tennis, but because he remembered what that feeling does to a young athlete, the silence afterward, and he refused to let her sit inside it alone. And then there is Mary, a woman who spent 2 decades standing quietly beside greatness. Not in the spotlight, not in the headlines, but in the spaces in between where careers are actually sustained. She understood better than anyone what that midnight call cost her husband, the vulnerability it revealed, the instinct it followed, the humanity it exposed. And she chose to tell the world anyway because she believed people deserved to know that Rafael Nadal, the warrior, the competitor, the legend, carried a heart large enough to reach across silence and distance for a young player who needed it most. And right now, Alex Eala is ranked world number 29. She is 20 years old and her career is still only beginning to unfold. Somewhere in Manaker, overlooking the Mallorcan coast, a retired champion and his family watch her rise with a kind of understanding the rest of the world is only just beginning to catch up to. Because this story has never really been about one player alone. It is about what gets passed on when greatness is shared. Not just through coaching or instruction, but through presence, through timing, through showing up in the exact moment when silence becomes heavier than loss. Was it mentorship or was it something that quietly reshaped the trajectory of women's tennis without announcing itself? That answer will only become clear with time. But one thing already is, the best chapters of the story have not been written yet. From a Manila airport departure to a midnight call in Spain to a place inside the world's top 30, Alex Eala's journey is still unfolding. And behind it, quietly but unmistakably, stands a reminder. The greatest gift in sport is not technique, not opportunity, not even belief. It is presence in the darkest hour when nobody else thinks to call. If this story moved you, subscribe because the next chapter is already